everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming out on this rainy day for this exciting program today. We're going to go ahead and get started. And sorry, we wanted to kind of scooch people in the center today, but we're going to start spreading out as people come in. But thank you so much for accommodating us by sitting towards the center. So good afternoon. My name is Rhonda Pignozzi, and I am the Manager of Learning Experience and Programming here at OMCA. We're thrilled to have you here today for this important conversation exploring intergenerational Chicanx dialogue around art and practice. This is a part of our Spotlight Sundays programming series. And this series happens every third Sunday, and it takes a deep dive into topics, practices, and experiences that drive and shape California and beyond. We hope you'll consider becoming a member of OMCA by joining our community. Membership is a wonderful way to not only show your support for our institution, but for supporting community partnerships like today. So take a look on our website, museumca.org, for more information. And if you haven't already, please do check out the exhibition that helped to inform this panel today, Por el Pueblo, the Legacy and Influence of Malaquías Montoya, in our Great Hall. That's on view till June 30th. So go ahead and remember, you can check it out after the panel or another time. Today you can have all gallery access with your event sticker. So today might be the day to go. So now on to the panel. We have on our panel today, Malaquías Montoya. As you all know, Malaquías' unique visual expression is the art of protest, depicting the resistance and strength of humanity in the face of injustice and the necessity to unite behind that struggle. He's the co-founder of TANA, a community-based art center in Woodland, California, where he continues to teach today. Malaquías has lectured and taught at numerous colleges and universities, including Stanford, UC Berkeley, the California College of Art, and the University of Notre Dame, and the University of Texas, San Antonio. And he is, of course, the subject of our exhibition in the Great Hall. Next, we have Elyse Doyle-Martinez. Elyse is an artist, educator, and Brown Issues advisor. After graduating from California State University, Northridge, with a Bachelor of Arts in Gender and Women's Studies, with a focus on Chicano studies, Elyse moved back to Woodland, California, and found a place in education and youth advocacy. She started participating at TANA in 2017 to learn the silk screening process and build community with other Chicanx artists. Elyse works with system-impacted youth to creatively cultivate the next generation of Brown leaders. She uses the creative process to empower young people and develop communities. Elyse's artwork explores identity, culture, social political movements, and the suppression of marginalized voices, and she has work in the exhibition as well. So welcome, Elyse. Next on our panel, we have Israel Campos. Israel graduated with a bachelor's from the University of Santa Cruz, California in 2011 and acquired an MFA from the University of Wisconsin-Madison in 2015. Their work is in the permanent collections of Kohler Art Library, UCSC Digital Art Research Center, the Zuckerman Museum of Art, and Oregon College of Art and Craft, and has exhibited in venues across the country. He is an active member of the Vox Pop Printmaking Artists Collective and the California Society of Printmakers, and also runs and operates Chayote Press. Israel is an interdisciplinary artist that works with paintings, print media, digital media, and artist books. Their work embraces art traditions of Mesoamerica to explore how historical events are interconnected and reverberate into the present, blending pre-Columbian iconography, generational myths, oral folklore, and contemporary pop culture. As a Chicano, he inherited the cultures of Mexico and the United States, but remains separate from both and explores this amalgamation throughout their practice. So please welcome Israel, who also has art in the exhibition. Everybody on the panel has art on the exhibition today. Next, we have Juan Fuentes. Juan was born in New Mexico, has been awarded an honorary membership to the California Society of Printmakers for his contribution to the world of printmaking. He has exhibited nationally and internationally and is in the permanent collections of the Mexican Museum of San Francisco, the National Museum of American Art, Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C., the Library of Congress, Washington, D.C., Center for Study of Political Graphics, Los Angeles, and the Legion of Honor in San Francisco. Juan also has a personal archive dedicated to his work at the California Ethnic and Multicultural Archives at the University of Santa Barbara. Please join me welcoming Juan. And today's conversation will be moderated by the Director of Mission Cultural Center, Dr. Martina Ayala. Martina is a curator, educator, filmmaker, and visionary leader. For over 35 years, she has curated art exhibits, produced cultural events, developed innovative programs, and led organizations serving intergenerational, multicultural communities. As a scholar and activist with a doctorate in international and multicultural education from the University of San Francisco, her life's work has focused on Chicano cinema, community, literacy, and spirituality. She's currently committed to preserving and developing, promoting Latin American and Chicana art history, specifically protecting the print posters archive created by the Latinx artists at Mission Cultural Center for Latino Arts. Now, please join me in welcoming all of our panelists in conversation.
Good afternoon. It's truly an honor to be here today and to hear from the voices that have shaped our history throughout the different generations of the Chicano movement. I mean, we have here 4 artists whose art has influenced and shaped our thinking, our activism, and who have inspired us and continue to inspire us. And, really grateful to Malaquías Montoya for your legacy that's still alive and going strong. I'm going to dive in quickly into the questions. This question is for all of you. How do you identify and why is it important to you? And the reason why we're asking this question is because a big part of the Chicano movement was the right to self-determination and to self-identify. And we have evolved from the 60s and 70s, and I'd like to know where you stand. So how do you identify, and why is it important to you? Who would like to start? Elyse.
I guess everybody was looking at me, so I call myself a Chicana. I was raised in a household with a Chicana mother, and she taught me that history and really instilled those values in me from a really young age. And it's something that I think is important to carry with me into the work that I do, and it's something that I want to hopefully inspire the young people that I work with to if not take on that identity for themselves, at least understand the values and the history behind it, where they come from and who's laid that groundwork. And yeah, that's me.
Hello, you hear me? I'm Malaquías Montoya, and I was raised in the San Joaquin Valley. My parents were farm workers, and so I just followed in their footsteps until I got the age where I could leave home. And I went into the military, went into junior college, and then came out to the Bay Area. I identify as a Chicano. I'm very, very proud of that name. The whole Third World Strike at the UC Berkeley in the mid-'60s was identifying with the term Chicano. And it wasn't something that they just gave us. They named us Mexican Americans, and then they wanted to name us Hispanics. And so we purposely chose a name that was not necessarily championed by our people. It was a derogatory term, but that's what we wanted to be, Chicanos, and to identify with that. But now I think it's changed. There's another names that people are calling themselves something Latinx, I don't know. But I remain a Chicano, and I'm very proud of that. Thank you. Okay with that.
Hi, I'm Juan Fuentes. I think my upbringing is very similar to Malaquías' in the sense that my family also, they're Mexicanos, but born in Ruidosa, Texas, right along the border. So really, they were Mexican Americans. They moved to New Mexico, and then I was born in New Mexico. I'm one of 11. My family settled in Salinas Valley, Monterey County. I grew up in Watsonville, and was raised in the early years of my life. We were raised in the farm labor camps there, and my coming to similar to Malaquías in my coming to San Francisco in 1969 and being part of the educational opportunity program at San Francisco State, right at the tail end of the strike, kind of set the tone for my being an artist that got educated about the Chicano movement, and I think the farm workers' struggle had a big impact, and I could easily identify with the farm worker struggle because I knew it firsthand, having grown up in the farm labor camps and so forth, and growing up in Watsonville. And for me, it was like, okay, I'm Mexican American, but the way the gringos saw us, we were just, everybody was Mexican, and but even with my relatives and my father's family is from Chihuahua. We went to Mexico to visit. It was like we were gringos, and so with the Chicano movement and the Chicano identity, it gave us a place in terms of who we were as a people in this country, which was kind of erased in our school systems and all that as we were growing up. So it gave us some strength. And the other powerful part about the identity of Chicano for me was that it referred to our roots from the indigenous cultures of our roots, and not the Hispanic and the Spanish part of our roots, which are there as well, right? But that indigenous part has always been, erased. And the Chicano movement actually brought that connection for me, and it made me identify with and to support the Native American struggle and the American Indian movement. And I worked on the Native American Defense Committee for years because I could identify, not as a Native American, but as a Chicano American from the Americas, with some indigenous roots to it. And it just kind of planted us as a people, I think. That's it.
So I grew up in South Central LA with a neighborhood primarily of immigrants. So growing up, I always considered myself Mexican. I didn't learn English until I was like in 5th grade. So that kind of upbringing, I wasn't even familiar with Chicano, because again, where I come from is Mexican. But it wasn't until I was going to school, it wasn't until I got to college that I didn't really fit in that label. So again, I would go to Mexico and we would not be considered Mexican. I would come here into the United States as I was mingling with all the people that I was interacting with, and again, I wasn't considered American. So I found this label that I was able to comfortably fit into, and that was Chicano, so that's what I do consider myself Chicano. The other reason why I do identify myself as Chicano is just as a refusal to assimilate completely into America. I think it's a powerful identifier to kind of go on to what Juan was saying, that we come from a different background. We're not Eurocentric. We are not America-centric, it's something different. And that's something that I very proudly carry. Again, our roots are in this continent. We can trace our lineage into this continent, and that's something that I acknowledge with the label Chicano. And again, just thank the people who came before me, just because they were able to cement that into my upbringing once I started to go through academia, just find a place that, and a label that I could fit into, which was great, really.
The next question is really important because there has been an evolution of the word. You know, we have the X now, and I would like you to answer this question from your position, you know, the history that you lived and what you saw. The question is, in what ways have you seen gender and queerness represented in the Chicano, Chicana, Chicanx art movement? How is it represented back in the 60s and 70s? How is it represented today? Who would like to answer that first?
All right, I guess it's me again. So I think as Chicano art has evolved, it's just as diverse as the Chicano identity itself. And so now working with youth, working with young people who might not have learned what Chicano is at school and didn't have that at home, they kind of get that idea of what that looks like through kind of mainstream media, movies. And so when I ask them that question, they say it's, black and gray tattoos and lowrider art and all this. I'm like, yes, it's that, but also this. And so when we walk into spaces like Tana and see, there's a piece by Julio Salgado that's hanging up that says, quiero mi cuirse. And so he's talking about his queerness and wanting to have a quinceañera, something that's traditional in his culture, but also kind of queering that in a way. And so for them to see that and say, that's Chicano art too, like it opens up their mind, it makes them more empathetic, but also opens up what they think they can do as Chicano artists, as instead of it just being this one thing that they had in their head or this one thing that they see in books, or it's just silkscreen or just murals. There's so many possibilities for them to be able to express themselves. So that's kind of how I've seen it more recently.
Well, I guess because of the type of work I do, all of my work speaks about humanity. And I don't separate those who are involved in this and that, as long as they're in that part of humanity that my work speaks about. I have, over the years, from the beginning, I remember when I got to Berkeley, the first president of Mecha was this Chicana, a very active young woman. And then you see the works of Esther Hernandez, who are just very powerful and they speak very loud. The works of Elyse Montoya, is that her name? Elyse Montoya, who I had known and worked with, and I worked with instead. And the works that came out of LA in the early 60s, the early 70s, were very powerful by women. Murals who started to incorporate the images of women on the walls of our barrio, which was very, very powerful. I've seen plenty of work, and I respect it. And if you respect the work of anyone, you have to respect everyone's work.
Let me see, how could I approach this? I think that, you know, when I got to San Francisco in 1969, you know, I was coming from a background of machismo. My father controlled and ruled everything. I mean, you know, he was a beautiful person in his own way. He had his faults. I mean, he was coming from a background of, you know, Mexican men. And, my father passed away when I was in 7th grade. I think probably he was exposed to the chemicals out in the fields. But I saw a blossoming of my mother after he died that wasn't there because he repressed her as much as, and there was 11 of us. So that was an awakening for me. I have 4 sisters. Some of them really struggled with the people that they married because they left the home right around, before they even finished high school, they were already getting married because the first person they fell in love with, they left to get married. And they weren't good men. I get to San Francisco and there's a movement going on. And it's, Chicano, it's African American, it's Asian, there's a whole thing that's going on. And my consciousness is raised. I'm living in the Castro, and there's a lot of gay white men. And, you have to interact with your community. And, I'm trying to understand it. There was one gay person that I knew as a kid in Watsonville. I didn't even know he was gay. But he would come and do my mother's and my sister's hair. And he was a good guy, neat guy. I mean, that was my introduction to somebody that was a gay male and was feminine. But he wasn't threatening to me at all. There was a women's movement in the early 60s, 70s. It tended to be fairly white, but it had a third world component to it. And my partner, Michelle, was part of the Alliance Against Women's Oppression. And I was able to, again, because of the women's struggle and because of her participation, and she'd get on my ass if I was, and I could be pretty chauvinist in my own way, you know what I mean? I mean, that was my upbringing, We try to raise our kids, my son, differently, and he knows. But it's been a long, it's been a transition, I think, for a lot of us men, and we've had plenty of contact with Latino queerness in our community and the artists that we know, and we've had really good working relationships, like what Malaquías was saying. I've had a good working relationship with people that are, lesbian or queer, or LGBTQ. I mean, I worked with the, one of the, oh God, now I forgot, the Gay Straight Alliance came to the Mission Cultural Center, and I worked with them when we did posters and all that. There's been a lot of interactions with it, and even like Galeria de la Raza was pretty male-dominated, and a lot of the cultural scene in the early 60s, 70s, in terms of the Chicano movement, was very male-dominated and stuff, and that even has transitioned. I mean, you see the transition at Galeria de la Raza. It's a queer Chicana that runs the gallery now, and the programming is changed. She's made it more powerful and more inclusive to more people, so it's good. That's kind of my experience with it. And I worked with the transgender community when I taught in the county jails, and that was a real eye-opener for me because talking about people that are oppressed, and then you see these folks that are, it's a whole different level of oppression. And again, it was a way to, I had to raise my consciousness in terms of how I address people. I went to New York about 4 years ago to the Blue Mountain Center to do an artist residency there, and the first night when they were introducing everybody, they were asking us, how do you identify and what are your pronouns? I had no idea what they were talking about. I'm like, but I wasn't alone. There was an older Jewish woman that was there, and luckily it was a long table and there were a lot of people there. So by the time they got to me, I kind of figured it out. But when they asked her, and she was a Jewish artist from New York, she asked, "What are you talking about?" You know. So it helped me to kind of figure it out. And then I was thinking, well, what are my pronouns? Vato, ese, él. I don't know, but anyway. But I learned. You know what I mean? Anyway, we learn. We're trying.
So I do identify as a queer Chicano artist. So I will say, when I was growing up, to speak to some of the things that have already been said, the culture is very machismo, and again, it was something that I had to grow up with too, even though, again, I was growing up in the 90s, which is very recent. But again, that kind of mentality was still very much prominent. So within the priority that I felt when I was growing up was to kind of just express myself as being brown first. That's something that I still very much is the primary focus of my work. I will say, because when somebody sees me, they see me as brown first. So that's something that I can't really hide. It's just what you are. So one of the things that I've been doing a lot more in my own work is to kind of express, show some queer elements in it, only because it is very important to have that representation. I think it's very important to see yourself reflected in the art world, because that is something that I didn't really see too much as I was growing up. Again, queer Chicano artist. So that's something that I want to kind of focus some of my practice into. So one of the ways that I've been doing that, I do run and operate a printmaking studio in LA called Chayote Press. Chayote Press is named after my grandmother, Chayito. So one of the things that I've been wanting to do is, again, kind of give a platform for artists who might identify themselves as queer or trans or whatever, just to kind of give them the microphone and say, okay, now it's your turn to say something. And that's something that I very much prioritize within my own practice as an artist. Again, I do create artwork for myself, but I think another very important part of my what I do is, again, allow other people to speak and let's hear what you have to say. Because ultimately, that's how we develop an understanding. Once we are able to express what we're thinking or what we're seeing or what we're feeling, we're able to make connections. And I think it's only possible if we're able to hear from other people's perspectives who might be different from yours. So that's something that I think is very important, and I think it's something that printmaking is one of those disciplines that allows it. Because again, while we're working in the studio, it's very like hands-on. It's a lot of work, but I love the work. And again, as part of that, you're talking, you're conversing, and again, you're understanding. So one of the things that I have also realized through those conversations, the generation that is coming up, they don't know Spanish. And again, there's this meme, no sabo kid. So part of me kind of sees it as just another evolution of Chicano identity. It doesn't have to revolve around Spanish. It can be something else. But with that comes an understanding of language through the Anglo perspective. And I think ultimately that's where the X is coming from. Again, just maybe not an understanding of how the gendered language works in Spanish. So I think if that's what they want to do, I think that's great. I support them. And I think it's, again, an evolution, something that can move and be something else in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. This question, I'm going to ask Malaquías to answer it first, and then we'll move on. Do you think about your work in the context of social justice? And if so, in what ways? Or in what ways does it not reflect that?
I think my work does. I hope so anyway, and that's something that I've been doing since the third world strike. I was a silkscreen printer in San Jose, but I was doing commercial posters for local high school dances, grocery stores, you name it, anything, back to school sales. And it wasn't until 1968 when the Chicano walkout at San Jose State. At the graduation, all the Chicanos got up at a certain point in the president's speech, and they just walked out of the university, out of the stadium where they were graduating, and all of the other people, supporters who supported them. And that was the first really political poster that I did. And I went to San Jose State, UC Berkeley, and there was a strike taking place then. So it was pretty natural that I go into making posters for what was taking place. And then I just continued doing it. It was just the most natural thing to want to do, is to speak about the injustices that were taking place, not only on the streets of Berkeley, but in the world. And all over the world, there was injustices, mainly committed by us, by this country. We were in countries where we had no business being. But those that had a lot of power and those who had the money needed to continue to exploit people in other places to contain or maintain their strength. And I think that my work addresses those things. And no, I don't think it does. It does. And that's what I want to keep doing. I want to continue doing that because there's too many things that are terrible going on. And we have to, as artists, address those issues because it's another voice that we have. Being able to do artwork is another voice that we have to speak about injustices. Yeah.
Gracias. Israel, can you address the same question? Do you think about your work in the context of social justice?
I do. And one of the things that I've been doing a lot in my practice is just the way that you even represent the imagery kind of speaks into what you want to say. So what I mean by that, a lot of the work that I've been making for a couple years now, I've made a very conscious decision to not depict the human form from a Eurocentric perspective. So I've been doing a lot of imagery referencing like the ancient codices that survived. So that I want the foundation to be of my work. Just to, again, speak that I do have a different lineage, I do have a different background, and it's something that also kind of like gives an homage to some of the stuff that my dad had to experience when he was growing up in Mexico. So he comes from a very rural, small town out in the countryside. So when he lived that small town and went into the large cities, the first thing that the city people would say was, look at this Indio over here. So that's something that my dad had to experience, and it's actually one of the reasons why he decided to move to this country, because again, Mexico is the inheritor of a colonial system, so it's still very racist, or at least it was very racist at the time. So from my perspective, I wanted to, instead of like sweep it under the rug, I wanted to acknowledge it, and I want to kind of wear it as a badge of honor. So my work is speaking to that. It's speaking to having a different point of view of the world, and from that, addressing different political systems that might happen, or social issues. So for example, like I said, my neighborhood is still primarily immigrants. So when Trump was president, we had all these conversations when I was getting a haircut, when we were just in the markets. Because again, it was very real. It wasn't something that was just on the TV. It was very much affecting the people that were in my community. So from there, I mean, you can't really, it would be almost ignorant to not address it when it's so prevalent within your own neighborhood. So that's something that I wanted to do within my own work, and it's something that I continue to do. And again, if I have the ability to say something visually, I want to address something that speaks to those kind of things. Just because, again, I think it's important for voices to be heard from maybe from my background, and I think it can help people. It can help people view a perspective that they might not be familiar with. So I think it's very important.
Juan, can you speak to, do you think of about your work in the context of social justice?
Yeah, I guess, you're kind of forced to have to do it. I mean, like, we had to represent, because, I was lucky that my degree is in painting and drawing from San Francisco State, and I'm like, what the hell am I going to do with a painting and drawing degree, right? And it was my fortune that I met Rupert Garcia, another Chicano poster maker who was at San Francisco State, and we became good friends and roommates at one point in the early, early 70s, mid 70s. Malaquías, not Malaquías, but Rupert introduced me to Malaquías. I went to his print studio, and he was working at UC Berkeley, I believe, and those two gentlemen, gave me a platform for why my work should be, addressing social issues, and not only that, but because I was coming from Watsonville, so when I was in San Francisco, it was like my home was still in Watsonville. My community was in Watsonville. It wasn't until I found Galeria de la Raza, Ray Yanes, Ralph Madriaga, and the other folks that were around Galeria de la Raza. Rupert introduced me to Galeria de la Raza, and it was there that I found a community, and it was community. It was I spent 10 years working at El Tecolote newspaper and volunteering and learning about the community, and through Tecolote I learned about the social issues that the community, because they addressed the social issues for the community, and that gave me a reason to want to do my work. And posters were the natural form because they're multiples. You reach a lot of people. It just made it more democratic. It wasn't just like one thing that I'm doing that, where in the hell am I going to show it? Because none of the galleries or downtown people or museums at that point didn't want to see any of our work. I had my first exhibition at Galeria de la Raza, I think, probably 1975 or 74 with Rupert. And then we also showed those works at the Kearny Street Workshop in Chinatown. So there was this, connection. I went to Cuba in 74, I believe, and Rene Mederos, all the poster makers, Cuban posters, Aspal. Aspal was doing, which is a magazine that was being printed in Cuba that did solidarity work with Latin America and the rest of the world. And when I came back, I'm like, that's what I want to do. So I started doing posters. I do posters for the Nicaraguan struggle, for El Salvador, for the Native American struggle, for Palestine, which I still continue to do today, and it's more needed now than ever. It was easy. It was like, this is what I want to do. I mean, why not? What else am I going to do with my art? You know what I mean? It's like. It transformed, and it transformed because there was a social and political movements going on. We were able to draw from those movements and be like, I was contacted by people that were doing solidarity work for the struggle in Nicaragua, or the American Indian movement. They needed artists. They needed things done. The community needed things done for cultural events. I did tons of stuff for Encuentro del Canto Popular for years. That's all. That's what we needed. We just needed, yeah.
Now, I'd like to ask Elyse to bring us down to present day. I know that your work does reflect the social political context, and you're doing some work. Can you speak to this issue?
Yes. So I think the majority of my work does speak to social injustices. Something that Malaquías said is that his art was his voice, and it spoke better than he did. And I think I feel the same way about my work. I'm not the person at a march or an event to be holding the megaphone and saying what I need to say there. It's my visual voice, I guess, that I'm putting into these posters and seeing them connect with people that are there at those events. Right now, we're putting together an art show, and we're titling it Reimagining. And so we're asking youth, kicking off the conversation with a quote by Bell Hooks that says, it's the job of art, or the function of art, is to not just tell it like it is, but to imagine what it could be. And so that started off these conversations with youth to get them thinking about some of the things that they see in their own community, some of the injustices that they're seeing at their schools or in their communities, and what would they do? How would they creatively deal with that or change that? And so it's going to produce. We've done this show before, and it's produced some really amazing pieces that folks who come in who are politicians or who hold positions of power come in and they see it and they're like, dang, a 16-year-old said this, like that's powerful, and it's needed. And so for them to be able to connect with their own voice in that way and be able to bring it into a visual space like that is pretty powerful. So.
Thank you. I think at this time, we're going to ask the audience. We're going to be collecting the questions on the cards. And while those questions are being collected, I'm going to ask the next question, which I think is very important because it's a big topic in the art world for the Latinx Chicano community. The question is museum representation important to your practice? And who do you see as your audience? So I'm going to start again with Malaquías and take it from there.
Sorry. When I first started doing posters to reach out to different communities that were involved in the struggles, it didn't make any sense to exhibit in a museum. First of all, they didn't come out looking for your work. But if there was a chance, I would say no. There was no purpose, because the people that I was speaking to, the people that I was trying to reach, did not go to museums or didn't go to galleries either until Galeria de la Raza in San Francisco. So for me to exhibit in a museum at that time was just a waste of time, because most of the Chicano people just stayed in their own barrios, in their own communities. And they had no reason to go to a museum because there was nothing there for them. Now, I don't know what, 30, 40 years later, you see more young Chicanos being exhibited in museums. So it seems like now, and I know people say, well, you're just selling out, Malaquías. It's not that, it's just that now people do go to museums. We have students who have graduated from universities, different colleges, who are now going to museums and galleries. And that's where we can reach them. If we can reach them there, but that doesn't mean you give up your community completely. You just have another audience. And they have to be educated also. I did a series on the death penalty. It was a show about 20-something pieces that traveled all over. And I purposely reached out to galleries and museums because the people that I was trying to reach at that time was people who visit galleries and museums, because they were usually people who had the power to change things, to vote in the direction that would help something. But other than that, most of my work continues to stay in the communities. At colleges where there are Rasa students. Yeah, there's something else that just slipped my mind, which is, it happens to me when you turn 85, you're talking to someone, then pretty soon you say, what am I saying? But yeah, I think now is the time. Some years ago, when I started working at the California College of Arts, and that's an art school, so there was a bunch of artists, and their whole life was exhibiting in galleries and museums because that's how they made their life. So I was sitting in it wasn't a meeting, it was just sitting down, and somebody said, so, Professor Montoya, what gallery owns your work? I said, what gallery owns my work? And I said, well, I have one gallery, I said, that collects all of my work. And I exhibit there year round. And all of a sudden I said, oh, really? Where is that, Professor? So I said, well, if you go down and start off on East 14th, near the lake, and go all the way to 87th Avenue. My work is displayed on doors, telephone posts, and you name it, up and down, and I hang my own work.
Israel, can you address that question? Is museum representation important for you, for your practice?
I think it is because the first job that I got straight out of college was working for the LACMA, the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. So while I was working there, they gave me passes and I can bring anyone that I wanted. So of course I took advantage of that. So I brought my parents one time and they were miserable. Until we got to the gallery that was the Mexican artist that they have. They have a great collection. That's when they started to really get excited. They started to look at everything. And then I saw then that in order for people like my parents to be comfortable at a museum, they need to see work that speaks to them. So that, I think, is important to me because I don't want the museums to be just for a certain people. I want them to be more egalitarian. So how do you do that? You do that by representation, being able to exhibit work that is going to, again, reflect the people who go into the museums. And I think that's something that I am working towards because, again, it's one way to make yourself present too. Again, unfortunately, these institutions do have a lot of power. They have a lot of prestige. So if you're able to elevate your community by exhibiting in those kind of locations, I think it helps everyone, really. So that, I think, is something that I cannot take for granted. I think it's something that helps everyone in the long run. Although I will say, kind of speak to what Malaquías was saying, there's this alleyway in LA that is covered by graffiti, and I took my mom there too, and she loved it. So again, I want her to feel like that within an institution like a museum, because I think ultimately the museum also belongs to her. I think it's something that we have to work towards achieving. Mm-hmm.
Juan, is museum representation important?
Hell no. I mean, I'll be honest with you. What's important is well, now, because of the Chicano movement, because we've made strides in our work and people collected and all that, but it didn't have anything to do with me doing my work and doing the work that I had to do in the community. The museums have to open up to the community. I think the Oakland Museum does a pretty good job in terms of museums in the Bay Area. Because if you don't open it up to the community, your freaking museums are dead. I mean, because who wants to just come see a whole bunch of white men, white, Eurocentric, or whatever, which is what they show. At some point, I mean, look at the makeup of our country. It has to represent it, and it doesn't, and it's not going to until it opens it up to artists and it opens it up to community. I was in an exhibit at the Tennessee Valley Museum in Alabama this past year, an exhibition called Borderline about Chicanos and our response to the border and what's going on in the border. So I had a year to do work related to the border and so forth, and I added some cultural things into it too, because I'm like, who in the hell in Alabama knows about Chicanos? But it was, so I included some lowriders and some other cultural things along with the border stuff. But I think that was an example of, like, there's a transition going on in this country, and they're recognizing it, because why would they have this exhibit about Chicanos about the border in Alabama? But I went, it was a eye-opening experience. I don't know how many people ended up going to see it after, I was there for the opening and all that, but they're making an attempt. And I think that's been a transition from what it used to be, because it sounds like it was pretty conservative. So, yeah.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you. Elyse, you have what is your response? Yeah.
So I think along the lines of what everybody else was saying, it wasn't ever my goal to do that, to be in a museum, but it does help to, it helps the work that I do want to do. So, and I am lucky enough to have a partner that can kind of subsidize my pay sometimes, because this work does not pay very well. But when you get into spaces like this and you get, your art is more well known, people who do have money tend to want to invest in the work that you do want to do. So it might not be the end goal, but it helps, or it might not be the mission for me to get into a museum, but it does help the work that I do want to do, if that makes sense.
Thank you. All right, and now we're going to ask Malaquías a question from the audience. Could you talk about the Free Palestine print and the Sartre quote?
Well, that poster was done the last time there was problems in Palestine and Israel. I don't remember how many years ago, but most of the time when I do work for, people ask me, organizations ask me, Malaquías, could you do 200 of these for us, and you do this, and but this one I did on my own. And usually when I do a print, a poster, I want to include something, words that speak about what I'm trying to say. And there was this woman who was the art director at a school back in New York somewhere, and I don't remember her name, but it's on and she had said something in one speech that she gave about Palestine and Israel. And it was just, I thought, just right on what was taking place. So I was able to use that for that particular poster. And then Inkworks, I did around 50 of them, I think. And then Inkworks, who was an offset printing house here in Oakland, contacted me and said, Malaquías, we'd like to reproduce this into a few thousand. So they did. They offset a few thousand of them on a smaller version. But it was important, and there was a lot of similarity with what was taking place with what Cesar Chavez, the struggle for land, the struggle for better wages, and that was a lot of the same things that was taking place, the struggles in Palestine, the need for land. Yeah.
Thank you. All right, now another question from the audience. What responsibility does the older generation have to younger artists, if any?
If we're talking about older generation like myself, with the younger artists, I think it's our role and responsibility to work with those young people and try to hope they understand what it is that you're trying to say about the need to use our voices to speak about injustices, not only in our community, but all over. I did posters for Vietnam, against the war in Vietnam, the struggles that were taking place in Central America, because those were all, our country was responsible for a lot of the things that was taking place there in these countries. And if you look up to find out how many countries we are involved in, and you'll find out a name like 50, 60 countries, or maybe more, that we're there supporting dictatorships because we expect something back from them. And here, we're supposed to be a country that down on dictatorships, but yet we support them.
And maybe Juan, you could add to this. Do you feel that the older generation has a responsibility to educate the younger artists coming up?
Yes, I mean, well, yeah, that's pretty obvious. We have a responsibility, but the thing is, we're also in a position where, like for myself and Malaquías, Malaquías maybe has a little bit more ties with the youth because they work with Tana that has youth coming through it. I'm retired. I mean, I work out of my home. I work out of my studio. I'm not in that. I'm not teaching. I don't have the connection to that audience. So I mean, the best I can hope for is that people see my work and can respond to it, and maybe help. That will give them some guidance as to what they might want to do. And I think that's all you can hope for at this point. You know what I mean? I don't want to teach anything else.
Okay. Thank you
Yay,
so
thank you.
much for this enlightened conversation. It's been a pleasure and an honor to have you here.
Thank you.
Gracias.